barriers to bridges and breaking barriers. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what Kenya is doing to turn barriers into bridges. Let me take you back into a few years of Kenya's history. In 2012, we saw an outbreak of internecine violence in the northern border town of Moyale, which borders Ethiopia. The violence was intense, brutal, savage on all counts, about 35 clans on each other. It was a competition for resources. There was a drought that had ravaged livestock, made people food insecure, and basically a competition for resources. This is when the United Nations family came together and said, why is it that many years after many years, we continue to see the scale of internecine violence? And this is when a conversation started with the Kenyan government to say, what is it that we could do to start addressing the key drivers of these conflicts across the border between Kenya and Ethiopia, because they all share a common heritage, a common DNA, a common religion. And yet, the fierceness of violence was mind-boggling. And that's when a journey started in 2014, when a dialogue with the different clan elders, together with the county governments, the good thing was the process of devolution also started in Kenya and started to take maturity and started to take root. So what brought together was a team from the United Nations, from the government of Kenya, from Ethiopia, from the Intergovernmental Authority for the development of the region. And they said, let's try and change that paradigm. Let's try and change that narrative of constant affliction, of constant conflict, and the dire need to spread humanity into this sphere. Which led, in the end of 2015, to the heads of state of Kenya and Ethiopia, President Uhuru Kenyatta, together with the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Haile Mariam, came together. And this.
The program we're launching today is transformative in its ambition. All the more reason to be grateful for the support of our friends and partners. We know that the challenge of transforming this region is momentous. For the communities of our borderlands, conflict has been common. Poverty and violence have followed in its wake. Our task is to do everything we can to end the conflict and to make certain that Kenyans and Ethiopians in this region have the same opportunities as other citizens of our nations.
We have seen that extricating marginalized communities from extreme poverty and recurrent conflicts requires region-specific and people-specific solutions. It is clear that the cross-border integrated programs for sustainable peace and socio-economic transformation in both Marsabit County and from the Ethiopian side, Borana Zone and Liban Zone, does just that.
What we are trying to do here hasn't been tried elsewhere before. We are driven by a clarity of vision, but in some ways we are going to be feeling the stones as we cross the river, so to speak. But we know it will take strengthening the basic infrastructure, water points, roads, schools, hospitals, markets. It will mean creating the capacity, strengthening the capacity of the people who live on either side of the border in terms of.
This gives you a description of what happened on that day. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, each one of us that witnessed this particular event felt an immense sense of pride. The leadership of President Kenyatta, the leadership of Prime Minister Haile Mariam, bringing governments, the local organizations, the county governments, civil society, the UN partners, our country teams from Kenya and Ethiopia coming together. It was a moment of great joy. And that picture shows you what precisely happened. As you can see, our education minister, who was then the foreign minister of Kenya, Amina Mohammed, together with Tedros, who's now the Director General of WHO, with the two heads of state standing at the back. And the formal signing of the ceremony took place, an MOU was signed. And today, the dramatic nature of change, the peace dividend, that's the old road that you see on the right side. And what you see on the left side is the new road that connects Kenya and Ethiopia, all the way to Addis Ababa. Now, that is what is the peace dividend. That is what is about bridging barriers. That is about breaking barriers. And Kenya and Ethiopia, in many ways, have shown the way of what is possible. And recently, this program was evaluated by the United Nations University of Japan. And they said, Kenya's multidimensional cross-border program simultaneously addresses violent extremism, human trafficking, economic development, local governance, intercommunal peace, mutually reinforcing objectives and means now offered as a global best practice. This is the potential that we are talking about, or what the transformative nature of political will, of political leadership can do. Recently, a similar discussion has started with Uganda to focus on the Karamoja area of the Kenya-Uganda border. A similar discussion is starting with Somalia. Imagine the potential of this. Imagine what this could do in transforming borders into bridges, in transforming traditional rivalry into peace. The signing of the free trade agreement in Rwanda, where the African Union came together and wanted to make sure that Africa becomes the future European Union. You need borders which are peaceful, secure, free of violence, and which allows the free movement of goods, services, and people. What Kenya has done has trailblazed something which has never been done before in Africa, and is perhaps going to be the model that will be replicated elsewhere in other parts of Africa. And trust me, if we get this right, as we start to expand this program, it is going into Sahel, etc., Kenya and Ethiopia will perhaps share a Nobel Peace Prize. So that moment has come for us to look at the African Union as becoming the new powerhouse of economic growth. And that will only happen when our borders are peaceful. The new powerhouse of economic progress, social progress, the new powerhouse where men and women are equal, the new powerhouse which is free of violent extremism, and a model for the rest of the world. So perhaps the words of George Bernard Shaw are much more appropriate today than it was yesterday, that some men see things as they are and ask why, and some dream things that never was and ask why not. That is precisely what Kenya and Ethiopia have shown. Thank you.